Chapter 1. Dust and Shadows. The rain in the imperial city of Zhao was a constant melancholic sigh, clinging to the gray stone of the great library and dripping from the eaves of the towering pagodas. It clung to Xuan-Ying too, a persistent film of dampness that mirrored the constant feeling of being overlooked, of being something less than he was. He adjusted the heavy leather straps of the bamboo crate across his shoulders, the weight a familiar ache that settled deep in his muscles. Tonight, he was hauling the chronicles of the Azure Peaks, a collection of geological surveys and astronomical observations gathered during the reign of the Third Emperor, a dry, dusty tome, filled with the secrets of the heavens and the earth, secrets that, ironically, he was tasked with merely transporting. His life, for the past 3 years, had been a meticulous performance of unremarkable utility. He was Xuan-Ying, heir to the Xuan trading firm, a dynasty that controlled the empire's paper, ink, and, most importantly, the ancient scroll repositories. He was also, secretly, the last practitioner of the ethereal calligraphy, a martial art whispered about in hushed tones amongst the oldest scholars, a power to write intent into the air, to weaponize calligraphy itself. But no one knew this. To survive the cutthroat world of his family, a world obsessed with lineage and acquisition, he had deliberately shed every vestige of that heritage, becoming instead a lowly scroll carrier, a man perpetually dusted with the ghosts of forgotten knowledge. The library was a cavern of shadows and silence, a place of reverence and, increasingly, irritation. The head scholars, a collection of wrinkled, opinionated men, treated him with a dismissive indifference that bordered on contempt. Master Han, the principal archivist, and a man whose ego was as vast as the library itself, was the primary source of this irritation. Han, a veteran of countless scholarly debates and a staunch traditionalist, viewed Xuan-Ying with thinly veiled scorn. Had often paused his meticulous cataloging to observe Xuan-Ying's movements, tutting with the precision of a seasoned calligrapher correcting a flawed stroke. "The boy's strength is admirable. I'll grant you that," Head pronounced, his voice a dry rasp, "but it's wasted on such monotonous tasks. A man with such physical capacity should be engaging his mind, not hauling scrolls." His son, Wei, a poet of minimal talent and an even smaller ego, served as Han's personal tormentor. Wei, perpetually draped in a velvet robe that seemed too large for his frame, considered himself a master of verse, and saw Xuan-Ying as an inconvenient obstacle to his self-proclaimed artistic brilliance. Wei's favorite pastime was to test Xuan-Ying, a ritual of humiliation that involved forcing him to stand perfectly still for hours while Wei practiced his clumsy verses. "Observe, Porter," Wei would intone, his voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. "Consider the exquisite tension between the brushstroke and the emotion. You, with your calloused, illiterate hands, could never grasp such nuances." And when a rhyme failed to take shape, the final indignity would follow. A generous pouring of black ink over Xuan-Ying's head, a visual representation of his perceived lack of worth. The rain intensified, drumming against the stone walls, and Xuan-Ying continued his work, trying to ignore the sting of the ink and the pointed gaze of Wei. He was a study in quiet defiance, a carefully constructed facade of humility masking a coiled strength, a simmering potential. He was acutely aware of the danger of discovery, the precariousness of his chosen existence. Just as he was about to reach the main archive, a small, warm light drew his attention. It was Xu, a junior archivist, a young woman with intelligent, observant eyes, and a quiet grace that set her apart from the more flamboyant scholars. Xu was a haven in this environment of disdain, a flicker of genuine kindness in the darkness. She often brought him small comforts, a warmed bowl of spiced broth on a cold day, a sliver of candied ginger to stave off the bitterness of the library's stale tea, and, most importantly, candles. During the long twilight hours when the lanterns were dimmed, she would quietly share her candles with him, allowing him to read the scrolls he carried, sharing the weight of ancient knowledge. "The illumination is poor tonight," she said softly, her voice barely a murmur as she handed him a new candle. "Let me ensure you see the characters clearly." Xuan-Ying offered a simple, "Thank you, Xu." It was a rare acknowledgement, a recognition of the shared humanity beneath their vastly different circumstances. Suddenly, a shout shattered the quiet. "Enough! Stop your trivial scribblings, Wei." Master Han's voice boomed through the hall. Wei, startled, stumbled over his verse, sending a spray of black ink across the floor. "The porter is a hindrance, a useless weight upon our pursuit of wisdom." Wei, emboldened by Han's outburst, stepped closer to Xuan-Ying, his face a mask of cruel amusement. "Perhaps," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you should return to your duties, porter. Some are born to create history, and others are merely born to carry it." He paused, savoring the moment. "And you, I suspect, are destined for the latter." Xuan-Ying didn't respond. He simply continued to haul the crate, the rain still falling, the shadows deepening. He knew this was the breaking point, the culmination of weeks of subtle, insidious torment. He could feel the energy building within him, a tightly coiled spring ready to unleash. And tonight, the world was about to learn that a humble scroll carrier was capable of far more than anyone suspected. Chapter 2. The Ink of Wrath. The silence that followed Wei's pronouncements hung heavy in the great hall, punctuated only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the tiled roof. Master Han, red-faced with self-righteousness, shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on Xuan-Ying with a mixture of disdain and burgeoning fear. Wei, sensing the shift in power, attempted a nervous chuckle, but it died in his throat when a strange stillness settled over Xuan-Ying. It wasn't a deliberate stillness, not at first. It was more akin to a wound resisting attention, a pressure building beneath a surface of impassivity. But then, subtly, imperceptibly, Xuan-Ying began to subtly adjust his stance, the movement almost too small to register. The muscles in his arms coiled beneath his worn tunic, his back straightened, and his hands, calloused from years of hauling scrolls, moved with a fluid grace that belied his lowly position. Xu, who had been observing him with a quiet intensity, felt a prickle of unease. She had noticed this before flashes of controlled power, a heightened awareness that seemed to bleed through the porter's facade. She had dismissed it as the effects of too much dust and the strain of his work, but tonight it felt different, charged with something potent and dangerous. As Wei continued to sneer, a deliberate, mocking gesture, he reached out and deliberately splashed a bead of ink onto the floor near Xuan-Ying's feet. Something snapped. It wasn't a shout, not a dramatic display of force. It was a single, controlled movement, a shift in the air itself. The ink, still wet and dark, began to swirl. It wasn't the movement of water, it was as if the very substance was responding to an unseen force. The swirling intensified, coalescing into a miniature vortex, and then, with a snap like a breaking branch, a tendril of black ink shot out, unerringly, and struck Wei's wrist. The impact wasn't violent. There was no screaming, no flailing. Just a sharp, stinging sensation followed by a spreading rash of black, blooming across Wei's skin like a poisonous flower. Wei yelped, instinctively pulling his hand away. The rash pulsed, drawing blood, and within seconds, the skin was covered in a network of dark, intricate markings, the unmistakable signature of the heavenly script. Silence descended again, thicker this time, filled with a palpable sense of shock and bewildered fear. Master Han sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. What sorcery is this?" he stammered, backing away from Xuan-Ying, as if head touched a sacred and terrifying object. Xuan-Ying remained motionless, his expression unchanged. His hands were still, but the air around him shimmered faintly, a visual echo of the force had unleashed. He picked up a discarded brush, the one Head used to wipe away the spilled ink, and without a word began to paint on the floor, a single swift stroke forming a stylized dragon. The brush moved with impossible speed, and as he finished, the dragon seemed to writhe, to breathe, a miniature, ephemeral beast frozen in a moment of terrifying power. "The great dragon stroke," whispered Xu, her voice barely audible. He paints with intent." Suddenly, the guards, a dozen men clad in the imperial blue, rushed forward, swords drawn. They weren't aiming at Xuan-Ying, they were aiming at everyone else in the hall. Panic erupted. Scrambled for cover. Poets tripped over their own feet, and even Master Han, momentarily stunned, attempted to flee. But Xuan-Ying didn't move. He continued to paint, adding to the dragon, expanding its wings, strengthening its claws. With each stroke, the air grew colder, heavier, and the markings on Weiss' wrist pulsed with a sickly rhythm. Then, with a final, decisive movement, he brought the brush to his own forehead and executed another stroke, a tighter, more concentrated form of the dragon, a ripple of condensed wind erupting from his hand and slamming into the lead guard, sending him sprawling to the ground with a broken arm. The room fell silent once more, but this time, the silence wasn't born of fear. It was born of awe. The guards, realizing the true nature of the man they faced, ceased their attack. Their movements, once aggressive, were now cautious, almost reverent. The Grand Chancellor, Grand Master Zhao, a man known for his unflappable composure, strode into the hall, flanked by a phalanx of elite guards. He surveyed the scene with a calm, calculating gaze, finally stopping before Xuan-Ying. "You possess a rare and dangerous gift, Heir," he said, his voice carrying authority. "One that demands respect, and perhaps a carefully considered purpose." He turned to Xu. "Keep him safe, Keeper. He is a tempest wrapped in dust." Chapter 3. Echoes of the Dragon. The aftermath of the gala was a strange, tense tableau. The remnants of overturned tables lay scattered amongst the crimson stains of spilled ink and the shattered shards of a dozen katanas. The air, thick with the scent of sandalwood and fear, still shimmered faintly with residual energy, a testament to Xuan-Ying's unleashed power. Grandmaster Zhao, his face etched with a thoughtful intensity, circled Xuan-Ying slowly, examining him not as an heir, but as a contained force. "The Shadow Walkers," Zhao said, his voice low and resonant, "were not simply bandits. They were dispatched by the Kingdom of Azure, and their methods suggest a desperate need. The destruction of the Imperial Library would not just erase scrolls, it would erase history, knowledge, the foundations upon which their claims to the southern territories are built." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the terrified faces of the assembled scholars. "This event has revealed a vulnerability, a chink in our defenses. We have relied too long on armies and fortifications, neglecting the true strength of this empire, its accumulated knowledge." Turning back to Xuan-Ying, Zhao continued, "Your actions tonight were impressive. The heavenly script is a legend whispered amongst a few, a disciplined thought lost to the ages. You wield it with a proficiency that suggests a lineage far deeper than your humble position as a scroll carrier." Xuan-Ying remained silent, meticulously cleaning the brush with a scrap of silk. The gesture was deliberate, a carefully constructed display of composure. He wasn't offering explanations, only demonstrating control. "I understand," Zhao continued, "that you have chosen to conceal your heritage. A wise precaution, considering the dangers inherent in such power. However, discretion will no longer suffice. The Empire needs you, Xuan-Ying, and you, in turn, need to understand the implications of what you have revealed." He gestured to a group of imperial physicians who had cautiously entered the hall, led by a grizzled old man named Lai Dai. "Observe the young man," Li announced, examining Xuan-Ying with an expert eye. His body responds to the channeling of heavenly script with an extraordinary resilience. The internal energy pathways are not simply strengthened, they are reshaped. It's as if the very structure of his being is designed to contain and amplify this power. The physicians began a series of delicate probing examinations, their movements precise and measured. Xuan-Ying allowed it, his expression impassive. A subtle current of energy flowing beneath his skin, a silent acknowledgement of the scrutiny. He felt for the first time since his arrival at the library, a sense of being truly seen not as a clumsy porter, but as something far more significant. Suddenly, the arrogant poet, pushed his way to the front, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and wounded pride. "This is a farce," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You call yourself an heir? You used a discarded brush and a few lines of air to defeat 20 men. It's nothing but showmanship, a desperate attempt to salvage your family's reputation." He advanced towards Xuan-Ying, pulling out a small, ornate dagger. "I will teach you a lesson in humility." Before Y could make a move, Xu stepped forward, blocking his path with surprising strength. Her eyes, usually calm and observant, burned with a fierce protectiveness. "Leave him be, Wei," she said, her voice firm. "He has already proven himself more than capable of defending himself." As she spoke, a subtle shift occurred in the air around her. The faint shimmer of residual energy intensified, coalescing into a barely perceptible ripple. It wasn't the dramatic display of the great dragon stroke, but a quieter, more insidious manifestation of the heavenly script. A delicate pressure applied to the pressure points of Y's arm, causing a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain. Y stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face pale with shock. The guards reacted instantly, seizing him and restraining him. Zhao watched the scene unfold with a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Remarkable, Keeper," he said, his voice laced with approval. "The instinct is instinctive, almost primal. It appears the ethereal calligraphy doesn't simply lie dormant within you. It responds to the needs of those you protect." He then turned to Xu, a hint of genuine appreciation in his voice. "You are a valuable asset, Keeper. I am assigning you the task of overseeing the training of new initiates in the heavenly script. A difficult task, requiring immense patience and a keen understanding of the flow of internal energy." As the chaos subsided, a hush fell over the hall. Xuan-Ying, having finished cleaning his brush, rose and offered a slight bow to Zhao. "I accept your offer, Grandmaster," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "But I must ask, what purpose does the Emperor intend for this power? Simply protecting the library, while important, feels insufficient. There are deeper shadows gathering. Shadows that threaten not just knowledge, but the very balance of this empire." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the assembled dignitaries. "I believe the heavenly script is meant for something more than defense. It is a tool for correction, a way to ensure that history and the future remain aligned with the will of the empire." Chapter 4. The Geometry of Right and Wrong. The following days were a whirlwind of unprecedented activity within the Imperial Library. Xuan-Ying, now formally known as Keeper of the Heavenly Script, moved with a quiet, decisive authority that immediately set him apart. He implemented rigorous training protocols for the library's junior archivers, focusing not just on physical technique, the intricate weaving of internal energy, but on the philosophical underpinnings of the ethereal calligraphy. He insisted on meditation sessions, emphasizing the concept of chi flow, the continuous movement of energy within the body, and its connection to the world around them. Master Han and Y, reduced to scrubbing floors with bristled brushes and meticulously rearranging scrolls under the watchful eyes of impoverished students, were a constant, grim reminder of Xuan-Ying's power. Their humiliation was a spectacle, occasionally punctuated by Y's sputtering protests and Han's venomous mutterings. But Xuan-Ying paid them no mind, his focus entirely on building a cadre of skilled practitioners. Xu, meanwhile, thrived in her new role. Zhao had been remarkably perceptive, recognizing her understanding of the flow of qi and appointing her to the vital task of training. She quickly established herself as a formidable instructor, her quiet, deliberate movements contrasting sharply with the explosive power demonstrated by the other initiates. She introduced them to the 5 winds, the fundamental elements used to shape the air, teaching them to visualize their intent, not just as strokes, but as geometric patterns. The ethereal calligraphy isn't merely about force, keeper, she'd explain, her voice soft but firm. It's about precision. A single misplaced line can shatter a mountain. Xuan-Ying himself began a focused study of the oldest scrolls, delving deeper into the lore surrounding the heavenly script. He discovered references to ancient rites of the wind, warrior calligraphers who had used the art not just for defense, but for subtly influencing events. He uncovered accounts of them subtly altering the course of rivers, guiding merchants to prosperous trade routes, even influencing the outcome of minor political disputes. The potential for the ethereal calligraphy extended far beyond simply extinguishing assassins. This discovery fueled his growing conviction. He began to subtly observe the court, meticulously charting the interactions between officials, noting the shifting alliances, the whispered conspiracies. He began to practice his art, not in bursts of defensive action, but in controlled, almost meditative exercises, layering faint wind strokes in the air, tiny alterations designed to nudge situations towards a more favorable outcome. The Grand Chancellor, Zhao, was keenly aware of this shift. He summoned Xuan-Ying to his private chambers, a meticulously crafted space filled with jade sculptures and intricate astronomical charts. "Keeper," Zhao said, his gaze piercing, "I've been observing your activities. Your influence on the court is becoming noticeable. I find it encouraging." He paused, studying Xuan-Ying's face. "However, I also detect a certain intensity. You are not simply defending the library, you are correcting." Xuan-Ying bowed deeply. "With all due respect, Grandmaster, I believe the ethereal calligraphy has a responsibility beyond mere preservation. The empire is built on balance, on the harmonious interplay of forces. When that balance is disrupted, the consequences can be catastrophic." "Indeed," Zhao agreed, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "And you, Keeper, believe you are uniquely qualified to restore that balance." He produced a small, intricately carved box made of obsidian. "I have requested this from the mountain tribes. It contains the Jade Heart of Harmony, a stone said to resonate with the fundamental energies of the world. I believe it may be of use to you." As he opened the box, a pulse of warmth emanated from the jade, settling within Xuan-Ying's chest. He instinctively understood its purpose to amplify his ability to perceive and manipulate the flow of qi, to see the underlying patterns of power within the empire. Suddenly, a tremor shook the chamber. Not an earthquake, but something else. The air shimmered, and a holographic projection flickered to life, depicting a remote outpost on the northern border, the garrison of Frostpeak. The projection showed a group of heavily armed mercenaries, clad in the crimson banner of the kingdom of Xiongnu, constructing a fortified position. "The Xiongnu are accelerating their preparations," Zhao stated, his voice grim. "They've been gathering resources, bolstering their defenses. We believed they were merely engaged in routine border patrols." Xuan-Ying's mind raced. The mercenaries weren't simply building a fort, they were constructing a siege engine, a massive, ballista-like device capable of launching incendiary projectiles with devastating accuracy. He instinctively reached out, extending a single wind stroke in the air, focusing his intention, a subtle distortion of the surrounding qi on the construction site. He didn't strike the mercenaries, he simply altered the trajectory of a falling stone, causing it to shatter a crucial support beam in the engine's framework. The entire structure collapsed in a cascade of dust and timber, a silent, devastating intervention. Zhao watched in stunned silence. "Remarkable," he whispered, a genuine awe replacing his initial amusement. "You've done more than simply defend the library, Keeper. Juve neutralized the threat before it even materialized. He turned to Xu, who had silently entered the chamber, her expression thoughtful. "Keeper Xu, your insights are invaluable. It seems the geometry of right and wrong is far more complex than we initially believed." Chapter 5. The serpent's coil. The aftermath of the gala had settled into a tense, glittering calm. The Imperial Library, miraculously spared from total destruction, was buzzing with frantic activity. Officials from the Emperor's court, the Grand Chancellor among them, meticulously catalogued, salvaged scrolls, while repairs were hastily undertaken on the charred remnants of the Great Hall. Xuan-Ying, however, remained largely untouched, a quiet observer amidst the chaos. His acquisition of the library, a single, decisive action, had solidified his position, but also drew a level of wary fascination. His father, Chancellor Li, a man built of granite and simmering disapproval, approached him with a carefully controlled fury. "Xuan-Ying," he began, his voice a low rumble. "This display, this heavenly script, as they call it, it is an affront to the established order. A weapon wielded by a simple porter? It is destabilizing." He paused, searching for the right words, settling on a chillingly polite observation. "You have, in a rather dramatic fashion, demonstrated a capacity for excessive force." Xuan-Ying offered a small, almost imperceptible bow. "The preservation of knowledge, Chancellor, is a matter of vital importance to the Empire. If that requires a demonstration of force, I will not hesitate." He didn't elaborate on the precise nature of the force, nor the chilling efficiency with which had dismantled 20 trained warriors. Meanwhile, Xu was becoming a figure of quiet, unsettling attention. The senior archivists, previously dismissive, now regarded her with a cautious curiosity. She was consulted on the restoration of the damaged scrolls, her knowledge of ancient techniques proving surprisingly profound. Even Master Han, recovering from his near-death experience, attempted to engage her in philosophical debates, though his arrogance remained as pronounced as ever. The true focus of scrutiny, however, remained Xuan-Ying. His actions had demonstrated not just martial prowess, but a frightening understanding of strategic advantage. Zhao, now a permanent fixture in his chambers, continued to observe him, a subtle, almost predatory intensity in his gaze. "The Xiongnu," Zhao said one evening, as they reviewed schematics of the intercepted siege engine. "They didn't just build a weapon. They built a trap." The ballista was designed to target not just the library, but the water supply, the city's vital artery. A slow, methodical asphyxiation. Xuan-Ying considered this, his fingers tracing patterns in the intricate blueprints. They anticipated our reliance on the river. A clever, if ultimately flawed, tactic. He let the word flawed hang in the air, laced with a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A shadow, barely perceptible, danced along the wall, a ripple in the air like heat haze. It was a subtle manipulation of qi, a tentative expression of the heavenly script. It wasn't him. Before he could react, a small, intricately carved jade serpent, a common emblem of the Xiongnu, detached itself from a shelf and darted towards him, its jade fangs aimed directly at his throat. It moved with impossible speed, a silent, deadly threat. This wasn't a simple assassination attempt. It was a probe, an assessment. The Xiongnu weren't simply reacting to his display at the gala. They were studying him, learning his abilities, testing his defenses. With a barely perceptible gesture, Xuan-Ying responded. He didn't engage in direct combat. Instead, he extended a single, precise wind stroke, focusing his intent not on the serpent itself, but on the air currents surrounding it. The room seemed to subtly shift, a miniature vortex forming around the serpent. The jade froze mid-air, suspended in a shimmering cage of compressed air. "Impressive," Zhao murmured, his voice laced with genuine surprise. "You've not just mastered the heavenly script, Keeper. You've mastered its nuances, its potential for control, for manipulation. It's a serpent coil technique I've never encountered. As he continued to maintain the containment, a faint, rhythmic chanting began to emanate from Xuan. It was a low, resonant melody, interwoven with the subtle manipulation of qi dai. She wasn't attacking. She was augmenting his power, weaving a shield of protective energy around him. "Shu! What are you doing?" Xuan-Ying asked, his voice laced with disbelief. She met his gaze, her expression calm and resolute. "The geometry of right and wrong, keeper," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Xiongnu seek to disrupt the flow of knowledge, to poison the wells of wisdom. We must ensure that the serpent does not bite." The jade serpent, trapped within the shimmering air, shuddered violently. Then, with a final desperate surge of energy, it shattered into 1,000 fragments, scattering across the floor. Xuan-Ying turned to Shu, a profound understanding passing between them. The revelation wasn't just about her inherent skill, it was about her hidden potential. A dormant power awakened by his presence, by his commitment to protect the very knowledge she so dearly valued. The quiet archivist, the girl who shared her candles, was more than she seemed, and he realized, with a chilling certainty, that their journey together had only just begun. Chapter 6. The serpents echoed the scent of sandalwood, and scorched parchment hung heavy in the air, as Xuan-Ying surveyed the wreckage of the imperial gala. The great hall, once a testament to imperial grandeur, was a chaotic mosaic of overturned tables, shattered porcelain, and the lingering tang of spilled wine. More unsettling were the still smoking remnants of the Shadow Walker's blades, and the palpable fear etched on the faces of the Imperial Guard. His father, the Grand Chancellor Lu, knelt before him, head bowed, radiating a mixture of shame and grudging respect. "My apologies, son," Lu said, his voice rough with emotion. "I failed to see the depth of your abilities. Your actions saved the library, saved the Empire's history. It was a catastrophic error on my part to dismiss you as merely a porter." Xuan-Ying merely nodded, his expression carefully neutral. The acquisition of the Imperial Library, a strategic stroke that secured the Empire's intellectual dominance and allowed him to quietly dismantle Han's influence, was a significant victory, but the immediate task was control. He began issuing orders not for retribution, but for meticulous restoration. The librarians, initially stunned into silence, were now frantically collecting the scattered scrolls, overseen by a visibly chastened Master Han, who, under Xuan-Ying's watchful gaze, was assigned to cataloging the damage, a task he performed with a sullen, almost resentful precision. Meanwhile, Shu remained motionless near the shattered remains of the jade serpent. The air around her shimmered faintly, as if retaining a ghostly echo of the unleashed power. She was meticulously collecting the fragments of jade, each piece glowing with a residual warmth, placing them carefully into a small, intricately carved wooden box. "You've done well, Keeper," she said, her voice soft, her gaze fixed on the fragments. The serpent's echo isn't simply a remnant of its destruction. It's a resonance, a reminder of the delicate balance we must maintain. Xuan-Ying approached her cautiously, studying her. The revelation of her latent abilities unlocked by their shared moment of crisis was still unsettling. The depth of her control, the instinctive understanding of the heavenly scripts, nuances it bordered on unnerving. He had initially suspected she was merely a benevolent observer, a kindred spirit drawn to the preservation of knowledge. Now, he saw her as something far more complex, a hidden reservoir of power waiting to be unleashed. The Xiongnu continued, her fingers tracing the contours of a particularly large jade shard. They don't just seek to destroy, they seek to corrupt, to subtly alter the flow of information, to sow discord and chaos. The serpent was a deterrent, a visible manifestation of our resolve. But it is merely a single defense. We need a deeper understanding. She rose, stepping towards a massive, ornately carved desk, a repurposed table from the Gallus ruined buffet, and began to spread out the collected jade fragments. "I've been experimenting," she admitted, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "With the serpent's essence. I discovered a connection, a resonance between the jade, the air, and the heavenly script." Suddenly, the rhythmic chanting began again, not from Xu, but emanating from the jade fragments themselves. A low, pulsing hum filled the air, growing in intensity. The shards began to glow with an internal light, swirling with patterns of wind and energy that mimicked the great dragon stroke. It wasn't a destructive force this time, but a weaving, a delicate manipulation of Qidari. Xuan-Ying watched, transfixed, as Xu moved with an unnatural grace, her hands tracing intricate patterns in the air. The jade fragments responded to her movements, swirling around her, forming ephemeral constructs, miniature dragons, swirling clouds, even fleeting images of ancient scrolls. "You're not just controlling the jade," he realized, a thrill of understanding coursing through him. "You're resonating with it. You're amplifying the serpent's power, not through brute force, but through subtle harmonies." He stepped forward, attempting to replicate her movements, to understand the underlying principle. But as he tried to channel the air, to paint the intent, he felt nothing. His efforts produced only a faint shimmer, a whisper of energy, a pale imitation of Shu's vibrant display. "It's not about forcing," Xu explained, her voice laced with a quiet authority. "It's about listening. The serpent isn't a weapon keeper. It's a conduit. It allows us to tap into the fundamental energies of the universe, to shape them with our will. But only if we understand the rhythm, the harmony." She stopped, the humming subsided, and the jade fragments dimmed back to their quiet glow. "The Onu will come again," she said, her gaze meeting his. "They will not simply attack with steel. They will attack with deception, with misdirection, with the insidious erosion of truth. We must learn to fight on a different plane, to anticipate their moves, to counteract their manipulations." The serpent's echo is beginning a step towards understanding a power far more profound than I ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Scale. The purchase of the Imperial Library settled like a heavy stone on Xuan-Ying's shoulders, a tangible representation of both his birthright and the burden of responsibility. He spent the following weeks immersed in the vast collection, not as a scholar but as a sentinel, meticulously cataloging and reinforcing the security systems. He implemented a network of concealed pressure plates beneath the floorboards, triggering a cascade of ink-infused wind blasts, a subtle deterrent to unwelcome visitors. He subtly altered the architecture of the central archive, creating blind angles and concealed alcoves, optimizing the space for the writing of intent, as he called it. Xu, meanwhile, blossomed under her new role. The private library, carved from jade and sandalwood, became her sanctuary. She spent hours meditating amidst the shimmering fragments of serpent jade, learning to coax their power, not with forceful commands, but with a gentle, almost devotional rhythm. She introduced Xuan-Ying to the deeper principles of the ethereal calligraphy, the intricate dances of breath, the philosophical foundations woven into the strokes, the understanding that the air itself was a sentient entity. Think of it not as wielding a weapon, but shaping a dream. She'd instruct, her fingers tracing intricate patterns in the air. The serpent's scale isn't about destruction. It's about preservation. It's about maintaining the integrity of the flow. Their training progressed with a measured intensity. Xuan-Ying, accustomed to the brutal physicality of physical combat, found the ethereal calligraphy initially frustrating. He struggled to control the volatile energy, often unleashing bursts of raw wind that shattered scrolls and nearly pinned him to the floor. Xu passionately corrected him, emphasizing the importance of stillness, of feeling the pulse of the universe, of finding the resonance within himself. "You fight with your muscles," she'd say, her voice a low murmur. "But the serpent fights with your spirit." One evening, After a particularly grueling session, Xuan-Ying found himself alone in the central archive, examining a newly acquired scroll detailing a legendary battle from the reign of Emperor Jeozu. The scroll depicted a warrior, clad in shimmering armor, using a similar wind-based technique, a defensive maneuver designed to deflect arrows. As he studied the depiction, a chilling realization dawned on him. Master Han, and indeed all the scholars who dismissed him, hadn't been motivated purely by arrogance. They feared him. They feared the raw, untapped potential of the ethereal calligraphy. Suddenly, a faint whisper of movement caught his attention. The jade fragments in Shu's library were pulsing with an unusual intensity, mirroring the patterns depicted in the scroll. He rushed to her side, finding her suspended in a meditative pose, her eyes closed, her fingers weaving intricate patterns in the air. The jade fragments coalesced, forming a miniature, three-dimensional representation of the ancient battle, complete with spectral warriors and shimmering arrows. "You're reaching beyond simple defense," Xuan-Ying observed, mesmerized. "You're not just creating a shield, you're constructing a battlefield, a reflection of the past." Shu opened her eyes, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "The past isn't merely a record, Xuan-Ying. It's an echo, a potential. The Ionu didn't just defeat us with their armies. They undermined our understanding of ourselves, of our power. They planted seeds of doubt, whispering that our strength was merely brute force, not a harmonious extension of the universe." She gestured to the miniature battle unfolding before them. "We need to understand not just how to execute the heavenly script, but why. The serpent scale is a mirror. It reflects our intentions, our fears, our vulnerabilities. To truly control it, we must confront them." As she spoke, the miniature battle intensified. Spectral arrows began to fly, not towards an illusory target, but towards Xuan-Ying. He instinctively raised his hands, and a wall of shimmering wind erupted, deflecting the attacks. But this time, something was different. The air didn't simply repel the arrows, it absorbed them. The energy of the spectral projectiles dissipating into a cool, tranquil mist. "You're not just defending yourself," Shu exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. "You're neutralizing the attack. You're not forcing your will, you're harmonizing with the force itself. You're learning to bend the Sionist deception against them." The realization struck Xuan-Ying with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just mastered the great dragon stroke, he was beginning to grasp the true depth of the ethereal calligraphy, a subtle art of counter-manipulation, of transforming an enemy's aggression into their own undoing. The serpent scale wasn't simply a weapon, it was the key to unlocking a war fought on a plane, far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. Chapter 8. The serpents embrace the miniature battlefield. A meticulously crafted diorama, depicting a siege upon a forgotten fortress, continued to pulse with an unsettling energy. It had begun as a simple exercise, a way for Shu to illustrate the core principles of the heavenly script: control, precision, and the channeling of internal energy. But now, it felt like a microcosm of a looming war, a testing ground for a power far more profound than either of them understood. Shu, normally calm and observant, was a whirlwind of controlled excitement. "The energy isn't expelled," she was saying, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on a jade tablet depicting a coiled serpent. "It's redirected. The arrows aren't simply stopped, their momentum is absorbed, their aggressive intent mitigated." Xuan-Ying, still slightly breathless from the exertion of the previous encounter, focused his attention on the shimmering air surrounding him. It wasn't a protective shield. Not entirely. It felt receptive. He could almost sense the residual traces of the spectral arrows, their cold phantom energy clinging to the air like frost. He deliberately relaxed his stance, mirroring Shu's earlier observation, a conscious effort to move with the force, rather than against it. Suddenly, the miniature arrows ceased their barrage. The spectral soldiers, previously frozen in an eternal assault, shifted slightly, as if considering a new course of action. A tiny illusory battle standard, representing the invading Xiongnu, crumpled to the ground, not from a forceful blow, but from a subtle shift in the air pressure. "It's working," Wei, who had been observing the demonstration with a sneer, suddenly blurted out. His face flushed with a mixture of astonishment and something akin to fear. You're healing them." Xuan-Ying didn't respond to Wei's observation. He was lost in the deeper currents of the ethereal calligraphy. He reached out, not with a forceful command, but with a gesture of gentle inquiry. He visualized the spectral arrow, its intent, its chilling emptiness, and using the serpent scale as a template, he began to paint with his energy. Instead of a defensive wall, a swirling vortex of iridescent mist formed around the crumpled battle standard. The spectral soldiers, previously poised for attack, became enveloped in the mist, their aggressive energy slowly dissolving, their movements softening, their malice replaced by a strange, almost wistful tranquility. "You're not destroying their aggression," she whispered, her eyes wide with understanding. "You're dissolving it, converting it into neutrality. The serpent doesn't just ward off the snake, it transforms it into a harmless stone." The realization hit Xuan-Ying with a force that rivaled the initial shock of his power reveal. The heavenly script wasn't merely a weapon of attack, it was a tool of balance, a method of manipulating the flow of energy, not just within oneself, but within the world itself. It was a skill honed not through brute strength, but through profound empathy and an almost terrifying understanding of intent. "The Xiongnu," Shu continued, her voice hushed. "They don't fight with swords and spears. They fight with despair, with the conviction that their cause is righteous, that their enemies are inherently flawed. That's the poison that fuels their aggression. And you're neutralizing it." As she spoke, the miniature battlefield underwent a dramatic shift. The spectral soldiers, no longer animated by hostility, began to coalesce into a small defensive formation, mirroring the movements of a disciplined Imperial Guard. They weren't attacking. They were simply standing their ground, presenting a calm, unthreatening presence. Suddenly, a low hum resonated from within Xuan-Ying, a subtle vibration that spread through his body. He felt a connection, not just to the air around him, but to the very fabric of the miniature world. He saw, with startling clarity, the intricate network of energy that bound the spectral soldiers together, the threads of intent that guided their actions. He understood then that the serpent's scale wasn't just a representation of the ethereal calligraphy. It was a key to unlocking the hidden currents of power that flowed beneath the surface of reality. And he, unknowingly, was beginning to master its intricate design. He lowered his hand, the swirling mist dissipating. The miniature battle dissolved, leaving behind only the silent, intricate diorama, and the two figures bathed in the soft glow of the candlelight. Shu reached out and gently touched his hand. "You've unlocked a deeper level of understanding, Xuan-Ying. The heavenly script, it's not about conquering enemies. It's about understanding them, about recognizing the source of their actions, and subtly shifting the parameters of the conflict." Xuan-Ying looked at her, a slow, dawning comprehension in his eyes. He finally understood the whispers that had haunted him for so long, the warnings about brute force, the emphasis on harmony and understanding. The strength wasn't in the devastating strike, but in the quiet, transformative power of the serpent's embrace. He knew with a certainty that settled deep within his bones that his true journey had just begun. Chapter 9. The Loom of Influence. The aftermath of the gala was a swirling vortex of panicked officials, bewildered guards, and the hushed, fearful murmurs of the scholars. Xuan-Ying, now subtly radiating an aura of quiet authority, moved through the chaos with a deceptive grace. A single, elegant gesture here, a measured word there. His father, Grand Chancellor Zhao, a man forged of granite and decades of imperial decree, remained a monument to stunned disbelief, kneeling before his son, a disgraced heir suddenly wielding power with an unnerving control. The immediate solution was swift and brutal. The Imperial Guard, initially hesitant, was quickly galvanized by the sheer display of power, 20 assassins reduced to shattered fragments, their attempts to ignite the archives extinguished by an invisible force. Zhao, swallowing his pride, ordered the immediate dismantling of the Shadow Walkers' network, revealing a coordinated operation orchestrated by the Kingdom of Viridian, a nation perpetually simmering with ambition and a thinly veiled hostility toward the Empire's vast knowledge. But Xuan-Ying wasn't interested in vengeance. He wasn't interested in rebuilding the library with scorched earth and retribution. Instead, he addressed the Emperor, not with demands, but with a proposition: the purchase of the Imperial Library for a sum that dwarfed the kingdom's annual tribute. The justification was carefully phrased, a blend of strategic security and a renewed commitment to preserving the Empire's cultural heritage. The Emperor, relieved to have a solution presented rather than a catastrophe to manage, readily agreed. As the legal formalities wrapped up, Xuan-Ying turned his attention to the immediate perpetrators of the humiliation, Master Han and Wei. Their fate was swift, predictable, and profoundly unsettling. Stripped of their titles and privileges, they were assigned to the poorest schools in the city, tasked with patiently enduring the complaints of disgruntled students while meticulously copying ancient texts, a punishment designed not just to shame, but to literally embed them within the Empire's intellectual infrastructure. "Let them find humility," Xuan-Ying said, his voice calm and measured, to a bewildered Zhao, "and let them understand the true weight of knowledge." But it was his interaction with Xu that truly captivated the attention of the assembled dignitaries. While Zhao and the other officials engaged in cautious diplomacy, Xuan-Ying found Xu in the library's west wing, meticulously cataloging newly acquired scrolls. He approached her with a hesitant grace, his movements still carrying an undercurrent of controlled power. "Xu," he began, his voice unusually soft, "I have been studying the serpent scale." Xu didn't startle. She simply nodded, her eyes reflecting the candlelight with a thoughtful intensity. "You've achieved a significant breakthrough, Xuan-Ying. The scale isn't merely a weapon, it's a map of the currents of influence that permeate this world. The ethereal calligraphy is not about brute force, but about directing that force, subtly, like weaving a complex tapestry." He paused, running a hand over the smooth surface of a jade scroll. He had been spending his days not just observing, but experimenting, meditating on the subtle shift in air pressure, the minute adjustments in his internal energy. Had begun to notice patterns, how the anxieties of a merchant affected the flow of the ink in his brush, how the simmering resentment of a scholar disrupted the alignment of the wind. "I realized," he said, his voice low, "that the assassins weren't merely driven by a desire to burn the library. They were reacting to something, a shift in the balance of power. The Kingdom of Viridian was attempting to destabilize our control of knowledge, to weaken our influence." Xu nodded again, a faint smile playing on her lips. "The serpent's embrace isn't just a defensive maneuver, Xuan-Ying. It's a tool for shaping events. You've glimpsed the loom of influence, and you now understand how to pull at the threads." Suddenly, he felt a subtle vibration again, more intense this time, a faint thrumming against his skin. It wasn't the panicked energy of a confrontation, but something deliberate. He focused his attention, and he saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a subtle distortion in the flow of energy surrounding the library's main entrance. "Someone is watching," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He instinctively raised his hand, the serpent scale forming around his palm, not as a weapon, but as a lens, a way to focus his perception, to understand the source of the disturbance. He saw not a warrior, but a scholar, impeccably dressed, holding a small, intricately carved jade figurine, a miniature serpent. The scholar was subtly manipulating the air around him, attempting to influence the perception of the guards, creating a ripple of confusion, a momentary distraction. You've been given a gift. Xuan-Ying, Xue said, her voice laced with a quiet wisdom. The ability to not just fight, but to persuade. To not just command, but to understand. The true power of the heavenly script lies not in its destructive capabilities, but in its potential to shape the very fabric of reality. Chapter 10. The Echo of Influence. The scholar's presence, a ripple of subtle manipulation, had settled over Xuan-Ying like a persistent mist. It wasn't an immediate threat, not a forceful assault of intent, but a delicate probing, a test of his newfound awareness. The jade serpent in the scholar's hand seemed to pulse with a faint, almost silent energy, mirroring the thrumming Head felt earlier. As an echo weaver, Xue stated, her voice calm, yet imbued with a sudden unsettling seriousness. A rare practitioner. They don't wield the script directly. Instead, they subtly nudge the flow of intent, amplifying suggestions, planting doubts, redirecting perceptions. They are masters of the unseen currents. Xuan-Ying focused his serpent's embrace, widening the lens of his perception. The scholar, a man of perhaps 60, with silver hair meticulously combed back and an air of profound, almost unsettling composure, was indeed crafting a scene of minor chaos. He was targeting the city guards stationed near the library's western gate. A subtle shift in their focus, a slight hesitation in their movements, a momentary disorientation enough to delay their response. He's not seeking to harm us directly, Xuan-Ying realized, but to sow confusion, to create an opening for others. Echo weavers are rarely malicious in their intent, Xue continued, her eyes scanning the bustling street. They are agents of circumstance, instruments of subtle pressure. Some serve ambitious emperors, others, shadowy organizations seeking to destabilize kingdoms from within. The realization struck Xuan-Ying with the force of a physical blow. The ethereal calligraphy he had assumed was solely a weapon of destruction. He had been so focused on its ability to shatter flesh and bone, he hadn't understood its potential for control, for the quiet manipulation of the minds of men. How do we counter him? He asked, his voice low. By understanding his methods, she replied, subtly adjusting her own stance. A barely perceptible shift in her energy that mirrored the scholar's manipulation, subtly dampening its effect. You've seen how he operates. Now, you must learn to recognize the echoes of his influence. Suddenly, the scholar's attention shifted. He turned his gaze directly towards Xuan-Ying, the jade serpent in his hand rotating slowly, as if acknowledging a contact. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "A prodigy," he murmured, his voice a silken whisper that cut through the ambient noise of the street. "I've been observing you, Xuan-Ying. You possess a remarkable aptitude for the heavenly script, a raw, untamed potential. It's a pity it's being wasted carrying bamboo slips." Before Xuan-Ying could react, the scholar abruptly ended his manipulation, vanishing as silently as he had appeared, swallowed by the teeming crowd. A collective murmur rippled through the library, a wave of unease spreading among the scholars. Master Han, ever vigilant, immediately dispatched a contingent of guards to investigate, but they returned empty-handed, reporting only a fleeting impression of a man with a jade serpent. "He was testing us," Xue said, her voice thoughtful. "He wasn't trying to force his will upon us. He was probing our defenses, assessing our understanding." Xuan-Ying felt a surge of frustration, followed by a burgeoning understanding. The attack hadn't been about violence, it had been about information. The scholar hadn't sought to destroy the library, he had sought to influence its occupants, to subtly shift their perceptions, to manipulate their decisions. He began to experiment, consciously focusing his serpent's embrace, attempting to subtly influence the actions of a nearby merchant haggling over the price of silk. He didn't try to force a discount, but to plant a seed of doubt in the merchant's mind, to nudge him towards a slightly lower offer. To his surprise, the merchant, after a moment of hesitation, abruptly conceded, offering a price slightly below the initial asking price. The Echo Weaver's influence isn't absolute, Xu observed, her eyes wide with astonishment. It's a subtle pressure, a nudge. But the more attuned you are, the more effectively you can resist or even redirect that pressure. A chilling thought occurred to Xuan-Ying. He wasn't just observing me, he was observing all of us. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were vulnerable to his subtle manipulations. The implications were vast, terrifying. The very foundations of his power, his carefully constructed reality, felt suddenly precarious. "We must be vigilant," he declared, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. The heavenly script is not merely a weapon for striking with force, but a shield against the whispers of deception. We must learn to recognize the echoes, to counter the subtle currents, before they drown us in the tide of influence. Chapter 11. The Cartography of Shadows. The acquisition of the Imperial Library had transformed Xuan-Ying. The dust and quiet of the scrolls no longer felt like a hiding place, but a fortress. The humiliation, the ceaseless prodding of Master Han's son, had solidified into a righteous anger, a sharp awareness of the subtle power Head spent years suppressing. Head spent the intervening weeks, not resting, but meticulously studying the techniques of the heavenly script, pushing beyond the simple strikes of the great dragon to delve into the intricacies of shifting forms, a defensive technique that allowed him to redirect incoming force, like water flowing around a stone. Xu, meanwhile, had become his most trusted advisor. Her initial astonishment at the serpent's embrace had morphed into a profound understanding of its delicate balance. She began to chart the subtle currents of influence within the library, a bizarre cartography of whispered conversations, nervous glances, and fleeting shifts in opinion. "It's like listening to 1,000 tiny bells," she explained one evening, her hands sketching diagrams in the sand with a piece of charcoal. "Each bell represents a single individual, and the ringtone represents their susceptibility to suggestion. The louder the bell, the stronger the influence." Their investigations centered on Master Han. The old scholar, it seemed, hadn't merely been a pompous critic, had been subtly attempting to manipulate the Emperor's perception of Xuan-Ying's abilities. Han had been subtly increasing the attention given to Wei, amplifying his clumsy attempts to discredit Xuan-Ying, feeding the Emperor's existing suspicions about the heir's sudden, inexplicable skill. Xuan-Ying discovered a series of carefully worded letters delivered to the Emperor's advisors, hinting at a disruptive element within the library, a young, inexperienced scholar who was dangerously close to usurping the rightful heir. The evidence was circumstantial, of course, but the pattern was undeniable. He was a shadow, clinging to the edges of power, attempting to destabilize Xuan-Ying's position through careful, insidious influence. "Has not a warrior," Xuan-Ying said, his voice low, as he reviewed the translated letters. "Has a weaver of doubt, and his threads are far more dangerous than any blade. We need to show him," Xu replied, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. A demonstration of the heavenly script, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of clarity. Their plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. They chose to confront Han during the weekly discourse with the Imperial Scholars, an event held in the Grand Hall. The atmosphere was always thick with petty grievances and veiled insults, a breeding ground for the subtle influence Han so skillfully exploited. As Han launched into a particularly scathing critique of the library's collection, accusing Xuan-Ying of hoarding ancient knowledge and deliberately obscuring valuable scrolls, Xuan-Ying stood a silent, unassuming figure amidst the assembled scholars. He didn't interrupt. He simply extended a hand, palm open, and began to write. This wasn't a dramatic display of the previous gala. This was a deliberate, controlled manifestation of the heavenly script. He didn't create a destructive force. Instead, he painted a simple image in the air, a single, perfect lotus flower, rendered in shimmering, iridescent ink. The air shimmered, the light refracted, and the image remained suspended for a heartbeat, radiating an aura of calm and profound clarity. The room fell silent. Han's face, already flushed with indignation, drained of color. The other scholars stared, mesmerized. The air felt different, cleaner, as if a layer of grime had been stripped away. "What is this?" Master Han stammered, his arrogance visibly crumbling. Xuan-Ying didn't answer. Instead, he shifted his focus, creating a second image, a depiction of the imperial seal, rendered with an almost painful precision. The effect was magnified, a focused beam of his internal energy washing over Han, not with force, but with an overwhelming sense of authority. Han collapsed, clutching at his chest, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. It wasn't physical harm, but a psychic recoil, a disorientation so profound that he couldn't articulate a single word. "The Echo Weaver's influence," Shu murmured, observing the effect with a critical eye. As adept at projecting doubt, but his utterly unprepared for the raw power of intent. As Han lay incapacitated, the assembled scholars scrambled back, their eyes wide with fear and respect. The Emperor, alerted to the commotion, arrived with a contingent of guards. The reckoning had begun. Chapter 12. The Ink of Authority. The Great Hall was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. The Emperor, a man of formidable presence even seated, surveyed the scene with an unnerving stillness. His imperial guard, a wall of polished bronze and sharp steel, stood rigidly at attention, their faces masks of bewildered awe. Master Han, still slumped against a pillar, thrashed weakly, muttering about false artistry and corrupted legacies. Wei, pale and trembling, was being guarded by two burly guards, his meticulously crafted poems scattered around him like fallen leaves. Xuan-Ying, now dressed in a tunic of deep indigo silk, a gift from Shu, subtly embroidered with silver dragons, stood calmly near the central dais, the discarded brush still clutched in his hand. The iridescent shimmer clinging to the air around him seemed to deepen, a subtle testament to the power he had unleashed. Shu, beside him, observed the unfolding spectacle with an analytical gaze, her brow furrowed in quiet contemplation. The scholars speak of echo weaving. The Emperor finally addressed Xuan-Ying, his voice resonant and carrying across the hall. A subtle manipulation of the mind, a distortion of perception. Yet, your demonstration was of a wholly different order. You wielded not illusion, but the very fabric of intention. Remarkable. He turned his attention to Shu. You, Archivist Shu, have proven invaluable in your observations. You understand the nature of the heavenly script. The Echo Weaver's techniques are but a whisper in comparison. Shu, hesitant at first, offered a brief, measured explanation. The ethereal calligraphy isn't merely a technique for striking with wind, Your Majesty. It is a channeling of one's will, a focused expression of intent. When shaped correctly, it can influence reality itself, not through brute force, but through resonance. Xuan-Ying added, his voice low and deliberate. It is like painting with a force that understands the very structure of things. A single stroke can unravel chaos, reinforce order, and with the right intention can even correct imbalances. The assembled scholars shifted uneasily, the arrogance of their previous dismissal replaced by a palpable sense of unease. Master Han, recovering slightly, attempted to regain his composure, sputtering about the potential for uncontrolled artistry and the dangers of wielding such unnatural power. "This balance you speak of, young man," he protested, "is a dangerous concept. The Empire's strength lies in established hierarchies, in the respect for tradition. You threaten to dismantle it with your artistic vandalism." The Emperor silenced him with a single dismissive wave of his hand. "Silence, Master Han. The young heir has demonstrated a capacity for both immense power and profound understanding. He will, of course, be under constant supervision, trained in the proper application of this skill." He turned back to Xuan-Ying. I have appointed you as the keeper of the imperial archives. You will oversee the safeguarding of our nation's knowledge and ensure that this unique power is never misused. But the emperor's words were coupled with a more immediate decree. Furthermore, he announced, addressing the Imperial Guard, a thorough investigation is to be conducted. Every scroll, every record pertaining to the ethereal calligraphy must be examined. We must understand the full extent of this legacy, and more importantly, the source of such power. This announcement triggered a flurry of activity. Captain Zhao, the Grand Chancellor's most trusted officer, a stern, pragmatic man, known for his ruthlessness, immediately took charge. He began issuing orders, deploying guards to scour the library, and demanding access to all known records related to ancient martial arts. As Zhao's men began their relentless search, a subtle shift occurred within the Great Hall. The focus shifted from awe and fear to suspicion and calculation. Master Han, sensing a threat to his own position, began to subtly sow discord amongst the scholars, whispering about the unnatural origins of Xuan-Ying's power and hinting at potential conspiracies. Wei, ever the opportunist, attempted to curry favor with the emperor, desperately trying to rewrite verses praising Xuan-Ying's heroic intervention, twisting the narrative to portray the ethereal calligraphy as a benevolent force. Xuan-Ying, observing this shift with a detached serenity, exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Xu. They fear what they do not understand, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the growing commotion. As Zhao's men unearthed a hidden chamber beneath the main archive, a chamber filled with ancient scrolls detailing the history of the ethereal calligraphy, a history meticulously concealed by generations of Xuan trading, firm ere the truth began to emerge. The heavenly script, it turned out, was not merely a martial art, it was a conduit to an ancient, almost forgotten realm of raw, untamed energy, a realm known only as the Silent Sea. And the Xuan trading firm, for centuries, had been tasked with safeguarding not just knowledge, but the very gate to that power. The revelation served to further solidify Xuan-Ying's position, elevating him to a level far beyond a simple scroll carrier. He was no longer just a man posing as a porter, he was a guardian, a protector, a living embodiment of a legacy that could reshape the destiny of the empire. The ink of authority, it seemed, was far more potent than he had initially imagined. Chapter 13. The Echo of the Silent Sea. The following days after the gala were a whirlwind of frantic activity. The emperor, a man known for his meticulous pragmatism, was utterly captivated by Xuan-Ying. He demanded daily demonstrations of the heavenly script, not as a weapon, but as an art, a demonstration of control, precision, and the inherent beauty of manipulating the very fabric of reality. Xuan-Ying obliged, each brushstroke a calculated display of power, a silent assertion of his inherited authority. The Grand Chancellor, a grizzled veteran of countless border skirmishes, remained wary, his eyes constantly assessing Xuan-Ying's movements, searching for any hint of deception. Wei predictably doubled down on his efforts to rewrite history, producing increasingly absurd verses praising Xuan-Ying's divine intervention, though his attempts now rang hollow, lacking the genuine conviction that had briefly surfaced after the gala. Xu, meanwhile, thrived in her new role. The newly constructed library, fragrant with sandalwood and lined with jade scrolls, was a sanctuary. She devoted herself to understanding the newly unearthed texts, spending sleepless nights deciphering the lost histories of the ethereal calligraphy. The recovered scrolls painted a vastly different picture than the sanitized narratives carefully curated by the Xuan trading firm. The Silent Sea wasn't merely a source of energy. It was a place of profound danger, a realm where the boundaries between reality and spirit blurred, inhabited by entities beyond human comprehension. The firm's lineage wasn't simply guardians of knowledge, they were bound by a sacred duty to prevent its chaotic eruption. One evening, As Xuan-Ying meticulously practiced a complex series of strokes, the Phoenix Ascent, a technique designed to bolster his internal energy, Xu voiced a disconcerting observation. "The scrolls speak of a resonance," she said, her voice low. "A resonance between the heavenly script and the sea itself." Xuan-Ying paused, his brush hovering midair. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Explain." "The texts detail how each stroke, each carefully sculpted wave of energy, creates a subtle echo within the silent sea. Powerful practitioners can utilize this echo to amplify their intent, to draw upon a source far greater than their own strength." She gestured towards the scrolls. "But it is also described as a potential for catastrophic feedback. A misstep, a moment of uncontrolled emotion, could shatter the connection, unleashing the raw, untamed energy of the sea, a tempest capable of unmaking entire cities." A faint tremor ran through Xuan-Ying's body. He felt it, a subtle vibration, an awareness of something vast and ancient stirring beneath his feet. It was as if the library itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, Master Han, pale and shaken, burst into the library, accompanied by a squad of Imperial guards. "A disturbance," he stammered, his arrogance completely gone. "The Emperor has detected fluctuations. The silent sea is reacting." The guards immediately began scanning the floor, detecting a localized distortion of energy around Xuan-Ying. The Grand Chancellor, his face grim, approached cautiously. "Xuan-Ying," he said, his voice measured. "The Emperor wishes to test your control. Has assembled a team of scholars experts in geomancy and resonance to assess the situation. You will demonstrate your mastery of the heavenly script, focusing on a simple meditation technique, the stillness of the lake." Xuan-Ying, recognizing the gravity of the situation, reluctantly agreed. As he began the meditation, Xu watched with intense focus, acutely aware of the implications of his actions. He began to paint the air, not with aggressive intent, but with a deliberate, measured grace, channeling his energy into a swirling pattern. But something was different this time. As he concentrated, the air around him shimmered, not with the familiar pressure of the great dragon stroke, but with a breathtaking beauty, a swirling vortex of iridescent light, a miniature reflection of the silent sea itself. The guards froze, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. The geomancers, initially skeptical, began to record the readings on their intricate instruments. The readings spiked. Then, without warning, a voice, ancient and resonant, filled the library. It wasn't spoken aloud, it seemed to resonate directly within their minds. "The gate weakens." Xuan-Ying instinctively fell to his knees, his control slipping. The vortex expanded, threatening to engulf the entire room. Xu, drawing upon a sudden surge of understanding, rushed forward, and, with a single, instinctive stroke, completed the stillness of the lake, grounding the chaotic energy, restoring balance. As the last vestiges of the vortex dissipated, Xuan-Ying felt a profound exhaustion, but also a terrifying clarity. He realized that his inherited power wasn't merely a martial art, it was a key, and the key was slowly, dangerously, unlocking. The voice echoed again, fainter this time. "Seek the echo, before it consumes you." Chapter 14. The echo in the obsidian. The air, in the Imperial Library, hung thick with the scent of ozone and sandalwood, a lingering reminder of the impossible display. The geomancers, their faces still pale with shock, meticulously documented the fluctuating readings, scribbling furiously on silk scrolls. Grand Chancellor Zhao, Xuan-Ying's father, stood rigid, his face a mask of controlled fury and burgeoning awe. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the head librarian, a wizened old man named Li, who seemed to be examining the damage to the far wall with a critical eye. Xuan-Ying, slumped against a towering shelf of Imperial chronicles, felt a bone-deep weariness. The exertion of the heavenly script had drained him, But the experience, the raw, terrifying potential unleashed, was far more taxing. The voice, the echo, as it had been termed, lingered in his mind, a discordant note in the harmony of his existence. "The gate weakens," he murmured, the words tasting strange on his tongue. He glanced at Xu, who was meticulously examining the ink-stained brush Head wielded, a thoughtful frown etched on her face. She was already observing, analyzing, seeking to understand what he had done. What they had done. "The readings, Master Li," Zhao demanded, his voice sharp and controlled. "Explain this anomaly. What did he unleash?" Li cleared his throat, his gaze shifting from the chaotic remains of the vortex to Xuan-Ying with a measured suspicion. "The fluctuations were unprecedented, Your Excellency. The energy signature aligns with the ethereal calligraphy, yes, but the intensity, the distortion, it suggests a connection to something far older, far more potent. Something like the Silent Sea?" Weiss' voice, surprisingly, broke the tension. Had been strangely subdued throughout the chaos, his usual arrogance replaced with a hesitant curiosity. Xuan-Ying shot him a brief, cutting glance. "The Silent Sea is not a technique, Wei. It's a resonance. And it seems I've accidentally resonated with a door that shouldn't be open." Zhao, after a moment of contemplative silence, addressed him directly. "The Emperor wishes to know why you were concealing your abilities. Explain yourself." Xuan-Ying rose slowly, deliberately straightening his tunic. "I concealed my abilities because I was being used, Your Excellency. I was a tool for the scholars, a means to an end. Master Han and his son were actively attempting to diminish me, to mock my lineage, to strip me of the knowledge passed down through generations. The library, this library, is not merely a repository of scrolls, it is a legacy. And I intend to protect it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The test Wei subjected me to the hours spent as a human desk was a deliberate attempt to break my spirit, to make me pliable. I endured it, not for his amusement, but to learn, to understand the arrogance that poisoned the very foundations of this institution." Zhao remained impassive, his eyes narrowed. "And the assassins? The Shadow Walkers? They were hired by a rival kingdom, seeking to destabilize the empire by destroying its knowledge. I neutralized them," Xuan-Ying stated simply. "I did not seek a fight, but I will not allow the destruction of everything I hold dear." Xu, who had remained silently observing, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Your Excellency, Master Xuan-Ying's actions were not merely defensive. He revealed a power that has been dormant for centuries, a power connected to the very soul of our dynasty. The readings suggest a connection to the creation myths, to the primordial forces that shaped the land." Her words hung in the air, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Zhao, surprisingly, seemed to consider her statement. He looked at the intricate diagrams spread across Li's desk, at the frantic scribbles of the geomancers. "There is mention of echoes in the ancient texts," he mused, his voice low. "Fragments of power, remnants of forgotten gods. Legends say they can be awakened, but at a terrible cost." He turned his attention back to Xuan-Ying. "The Emperor believes you have demonstrated exceptional skill, Master Xuan-Ying. He offers you a position within the Imperial Guard, alongside the most seasoned warriors of the Empire. You will be tasked with protecting the crown, safeguarding our knowledge, and perhaps understanding the nature of this echo you have unleashed." Xuan-Ying considered the offer. It was a gilded cage, no doubt, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to control, to understand. "I accept, Your Excellency," he replied, his voice firm. "But I require more than just a uniform and a sword. I require knowledge. I need to understand the nature of this echo, and the forces that seek to exploit it." As he spoke, a faint tremor ran through the library floor. A single drop of ink, splattered on the floor from the chaotic display, began to shimmer, morphing into a miniature, obsidian vortex. It pulsed with the same iridescent light as the one he had created, a silent, unsettling echo of the power he now wielded. "Seek the echo before it consumes you," the voice echoed again, softer, more insistent. This time, Xuan-Ying understood. The game had changed. It wasn't about retribution anymore. It was about survival. Chapter 15. The Obsidian Bloom. The Imperial Guard's training was a brutal, methodical dismantling of the self. Xuan-Ying, accustomed to the quiet, dusty reverence of the library, initially felt like a broken puppet, his movements clumsy, his focus fractured. The instructors, a collection of grizzled veterans scarred by countless battles and steeped in the traditions of the heavenly script, were merciless. General Zhao, a man carved from granite and silence, reduced him to a shadow of a warrior, drilling him relentlessly in stances, weapon forms, and the discipline of controlling his internal energy. Yet, Xuan-Ying adapted with a chilling efficiency. His ethereal calligraphy, honed in secret and disguised as simple physical exercises, proved surprisingly effective. He discovered that the precise control required to write a subtle pressure point became a second instinct, allowing him to anticipate attacks and redirect blows with startling grace. He learned to channel the residual echoes, the faint impressions of his power, not as weapons, but as tools for amplification, subtly reinforcing his strikes with bursts of compressed air. He was assigned a handmaiden, Lin, a young woman of fierce spirit and remarkable agility. She was a specialist in close-quarters combat, renowned for her mastery of the serpent's coil technique, a whirlwind of strikes designed to overwhelm an opponent. Initially, she regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. A scholar masquerading as a warrior, Shed muttered to her sparring partner, a veteran named Li Daidou. A dangerous folly. However, after witnessing his effortless defense against Li's relentless assault, a series of perfectly timed blocks and redirection maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, her opinion began to shift. "The man possesses a strange talent," she admitted, her voice grudging, almost as if he's anticipating the blow before it lands. His request for knowledge was met with a cautious, almost wary approval from the Emperor himself. The Imperial Library's archives were vast, but access to the more esoteric texts, particularly those relating to ancient martial arts and forgotten deities, was heavily restricted. Xuan-Ying, leveraging his subtle influence and his fabricated credentials as a student of esoteric knowledge, managed to secure the assistance of Master Jian, a retired scholar and former Grand Archivist. Master Jian, a wizened man with eyes that held the weight of centuries, became his mentor, patiently guiding him through the labyrinthine scrolls. He revealed that the echoes were not merely residual energy, but solidified fragments of the will and power of those who had mastered ethereal calligraphy, in antiquity warriors who had, in life and death, woven their intent into the very fabric of reality. "These echoes are like dormant seeds," Jian explained, his voice a low murmur. "When awakened, they can grant incredible power, but they are also inherently unstable. They crave to be expressed, to fulfill the original intent of their wielder. A corrupted intent, a selfish desire, and the echo becomes a consuming force." The training intensified. They practiced in the training grounds overlooking the city, the clang of steel against steel a constant soundtrack to Xuan-Ying's relentless conditioning. He discovered he could trigger the echoes with increasing precision, not just for offensive strikes, but also for defensive maneuvers, creating shimmering shields of compressed air, or momentarily slowing his movements to an almost imperceptible crawl. Then came the unsettling discovery. During a particularly demanding exercise, focused on channeling his energy to lift a massive stone pillar, the obsidian vortex head glimpsed in the library returned, this time far more pronounced. It wasn't merely a shimmering droplet. It was a full-fledged bloom, a pulsing obsidian flower resting on the training ground. Its petals radiated a cold, unsettling light, and the air around it thrummed with a palpable energy. Lin cried out, drawing her blade, but General Zhao silenced her with a raised hand. "Do not interfere," he commanded, his voice low and grim. "Observe." As they watched, the obsidian flower began to unfold, revealing intricate, glyph-like patterns etched onto its surface, patterns identical to those Xuan-Ying used in his ethereal calligraphy. A whisper, barely audible, echoed around them, reclaimed suddenly. Wei, Master Han's son, appeared at the edge of the training ground, a dark, predatory smile on his face. He carried a poisoned dagger, its blade gleaming with an unnatural sheen. "The scholar thinks he can control the echoes?" he sneered. "He is mistaken. Power demands a price, and this echo will be a beautiful sacrifice." Xuan-Ying realized with chilling clarity that Wei wasn't acting alone. The attack wasn't random. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to trigger the echo, to force it into a destructive expression. He moved with lightning speed, intercepting Wei's strike and, with a controlled surge of energy, shattering the dagger into 1,000 fragments. The obsidian bloom pulsed violently, its petals spiraling inwards, and for the first time, Xuan-Ying felt the full, terrifying potential of the echo, a flood of raw, untamed power threatening to overwhelm him.